Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all of you to the PPFD Forum on Successful Project Design and Implementation. We are looking at navigating towards an inclusive and green recovery. That is the theme of this year's forum. And this is session 2 on project quality in a challenging environment. In this particular session, we are going to present 2 case studies from 2 countries, and both happen to be in the energy sector. That's why I am sitting here as the facilitator. And these 2 projects will demonstrate how innovative resource mobilization and partnerships have worked in a particular case. And then in the other one, how the readiness framework has helped to improve project implementation and integration of climate adaptation and mitigation in the project design. So those are the 2 projects which we are going to present here today. Now, the first one is on Cambodia National Solar Park project. And let me first introduce both panels, the 2 teams presenting both these case studies at the very beginning in the interest of time. And the first project will be presented by 3 speakers. That is going to be National Solar Park project. And the first one, Rosemary Ong, Specialist Advisory Division 2 of OPPP. She developed thought leadership materials on public-private partnerships and privatization. She obtained a master's degree in business management from the Asian Institute of Management in the Philippines, and earned her certificate in finance from Escade Business School, Spain, and bachelor's degree in business economics from the University of the Philippines. Ms. Ong has extensive experience in advising on PPP transactions in transport, logistics, water, healthcare, education, and sports infrastructure sectors. Then we have Ferran, who is public-private specialist, advisory division 2 again, in OPPP. Mr. Ferran is a public-private partnership specialist in ADB with 15 years of experience in PPPs, mergers and acquisitions. He works on the PPPs for the Cambodia National Solar Park Program, the Dhaka Bypass, and the Rampura Amulya Demra Road. Prior to joining ADB, he was with the PPP team of the International Finance Corporation in Almaty and Belgrade. Ferran holds a BA and an MBA from Escade Business School. Then we have Joao Alulia, Consultant National Solar Park Project. Joao works with ADB as a regional clean energy specialist and coordinator for the Greater Mekong sub-region. He has over 15 years of experience in sustainable energy, climate change, and waste management, having worked in the international organizations such as UNFCCC, UNSCAP, and GGGI. Prior to joining ADB, Joao was the regional technical advisor of the UNFCCC on carbon pricing, instrument, and market-based mechanisms for Asia and the Pacific. He has a master's in energy management in Norway and another master's from University of Lisbon in engineering and industrial management, and of course a PhD in sustainable energy systems from MIT Portugal program. Then on the Pakistan project, Balakot Hydropower Development Project, that's going to be presented by 3 resource persons, starting with Adnan Tarin, a Principal Energy Specialist, Energy Division of the CWEN. Adnan is a Principal Energy Specialist under the ADB Central and West Asia Department. He is an electrical engineer with more than 20 years experience in the energy sector. He joined ADB in 2007 and has processed and implemented many energy projects in a few countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. Recently, he led the processing of this 300 megawatt large run-of-the-river dam in Pakistan, Balakot Hydropower Development Project, which is presented today, and is currently leading the implementation of this project. Then Mr. Aziz Raza, Project Director of this Balakot Hydropower Project, and he is an engineer Aziz is a professional engineer having more than 27 years of experience in the field of project management, development, and in completion of infrastructure projects, mainly related to hydropower, solar, road construction, tunnels, and buildings. He played an integral role in leading the team for developing the government and private sector hydropower solar projects in Pakistan. Then we have the other resource person, Nathan Reeve, Senior Climate Change Specialist, Environment and Natural Resources and Agriculture Division in CWRD. And he has over 15 years of experience. And in ADB's Central and West Asia Regional Department, Nathan administered and developed climate change adaptation and resilience projects, primarily in the water resources sector, and leads the department's climate change risk management processes. Prior to joining ADB, he was a senior research fellow at the Center for Climate Research in Oslo, and senior analyst at the mining firm Rio Tinto in London. So these are brief. This is brief introduction to both panels presenting these two projects. And let me now request the first team on the National Solar Park project to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanta, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on when you are. I will start our presentation on the Cambodia's National Solar Park by providing you the broader context of this project with a quick snapshot of Cambodia's power sector and how ADB has been supporting the government overcoming some of the challenges in the sector. And then my colleagues Rosemary and Farwan will go into the details of the project. So in this slide, as you can see, the demand for electricity in Cambodia has grown quite rapidly and consistently over the last decade, expanding almost 4 times between 2010 and 2019 in terms of energy delivered to the grid, and almost 6 times in terms of peak demand, which is what you can actually see in the line in this graph. COVID-19 has slowed down the pace of growth, which was still positive last year, but we expect that from next year onwards, pre-pandemic growth rates can again be observed. In the graph that you see here on the left-hand side, you can see how this demand for electricity services, grid-connected, has been met over the years in Cambodia. And while 15 years ago or so, it was met mostly through fuel oil generation and imports, recent years have seen more, or have brought a more diversified mix. And in the pie chart you see in the right-hand side, in 2020, the major domestic sources were hydro and coal, with almost 1/3 of power supply being met by imports. The graph that you see here provides a snapshot of end-user electricity prices in the commercial and the industrial sectors in Cambodia. And what we see in the country is that electricity tariffs are high in comparison with countries of the region, but they are largely unsubsidized, except for lifeline end users, and have exhibited downward trends in recent years. So it is in this context and against this background of first, consistently high demand growth rates, the need to rapidly expand power generation sources to cope with this demand, the high dependency on imports, and the relatively high electricity tariffs that ADB's energy program in Cambodia needs to be contextualized. ADB has been quite active in Cambodia, especially since 2017, and I mean in the energy space. And we have been providing to our government clients a comprehensive portfolio of solutions, which include strategic investments, transaction advisory, as well as policy and planning support, as you can see in this slide. I don't have the time to go through all of these activities, but for example, on policy and planning, we have been supporting the government of Cambodia in the preparation of a comprehensive power development plan for the next 20 years, which is going to be a very important document. We also have investment projects under implementation, including the National Solar Park project and a large grid reinforcement project. And in preparation, we have programs on energy efficiency and on energy storage with solar PV. On transaction advisory support, as you can see on the left-hand side, we have the National Solar Park project. We'll go into that in a moment. With regards to solar power development, earlier studies, such as the one that you see on the left-hand side of the slide, that was prepared under the ESMAP program of the World Bank. Earlier studies had recognized that Cambodia's solar resources are abundant and among the best in the region. But as recently as 2016, no solar PV capacity, grid connected, had been developed. And to support this, ADB carried out a solar master plan, which identified the priority zones and the roadmap for development by, for example, taking into account the proximity of the best resources to transmission and distribution lines, load centers, their demand profiles, and also by assessing the impact to the grid associated with higher shares of solar. So this study was very important for future developments on solar PV. And for example, this was the basis for selecting a location for the solar park in Cambodia. With this introduction, I will now hand over to Rosemary to provide further details about this project. Rosemary?
Good afternoon and good morning. So this afternoon, we will take you through a deep dive into Cambodia's multidimensional energy sector transition. This is a joint effort between the government of Cambodia and the Asian Development Bank to reformulate how the nation approaches power generation. As you might be aware, there have been a few challenges, and some of these trends include the transition from thermal to large hydro to scalable low-cost renewables, from bilaterally negotiated power purchase agreements to competitive international tenders, and from binary public or private operator and ownership structures to more complex blended financing modalities. Now, one question is why PPPs? So it is important to harness the private sector's innovation and efficiencies in addressing the increasing urgent supply shortfall in Cambodia. And it is in this context that PPP structures or having the collaboration between the public sector of Cambodia as well as the private sectors will harness and provide a value for money solution for renewable energy, as well as attracting private sector capital. Now, there are a few challenges that the transaction team has faced in Cambodia. The first challenge is in relation to building consensus in respect of grid stability, efficiency concerns, and the national utility. Now, this is a common concern and challenge faced by developing member countries. The second challenge is in respect of formulating an enabled business environment for transparency, risk pricing, and attracting private sector capital into Cambodia. And let me hand over to my colleague, Farhan, who can talk about the project details. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I think that I was having problems. I was on mute. There is always someone in a conference that has that problem, and this time it was me. I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of the project and how did we manage to attract private capital and how this process ended up being. Before I start talking about how we attracted private capital, I want to give you a 30 seconds overview of the project. So the objective of this Cambodia National Solar Park program was to help the government of Cambodia build a 100 megawatt national solar park. This is a project that had two separate components that were separated very clearly, and you will see why this is important later. One component was the evacuation facilities, which were procured by EDC, financed by ADB through a sovereign loan, but basically that was a responsibility on the public sector side of the project. And then there was the generation side of this national solar park, which was financed, built, designed, operated, and managed by the private sector. And this private side, this generation side of the project was implemented in two different phases. So, as I said earlier, what I want to focus on in this presentation is what did we do to attract private capital? And that was important not only to have money, to have the funds required to build this facility, but also to be able to access the expertise, the know-how, the reliability in the system that was necessary for a power plant of this importance. We have to bear in mind what my colleague Joao mentioned earlier, that there was limited presence of solar investors in Cambodia. Only a 10 megawatt solar park had been built in Cambodia. So for this project to be successful, we really had to attract international players, which means that basically Cambodia was competing for attention with other countries that had a better track record in the solar sector, maybe a stronger financial standing, better credit worthiness, potentially even better solar resources. So we came up with a strategy based on 4 pillars, which were competitive bidding, having land acquisition and identification performed by the public sector, having a bankable PPA, and working with credible international advisors. And I will go through each one of these points in detail in this presentation. So when it comes to competitive bidding, the first thing that we realized is that the amount of private capital that is committed to solar project, it greatly exceeds well-structured solar projects that are available for investment. And the emphasis in this sentence should be in well-structured, that's the key word, and I'll explain what I consider by well-structured later. So given that there is more private capital than projects, it's logical to think that a transparent and well-managed tender process is likely to result in better outcomes in terms of price or even conditions for the buyer of power than other procurement modalities that do not benefit from this imbalance. And I'm thinking about, just as examples, bilateral negotiations or feed-in tariff regimes. So if you have auctions, if you have a competitive bidding model, you are more likely to be able to get the last cent out of the private sector. Nevertheless, this competitive bidding is something that has an implication on time. And for it to work, you need to make sure that you attract enough interest from investors. How do you attract interest from investors? From our side, there were 3 parts that were important. One is the responsibility to identifying and acquiring the land was placed on the public sector. So as I said before, we wanted to attract international bidders, which have a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis local bidders in identifying and acquiring a site that is suitable for a project. And in solar, the site is one of the key parameters that determines how competitive you are, how able you are to offer low prices. So by placing this responsibility on the public sector, we really increase the interest from international companies in this project. Something else that we did to further increase the interest of the private sector was we simplified their scope of works, meaning, as I mentioned before, the evacuation facilities were responsibility of the private sector, were responsibility of the public sector. That was important because we were not sure if we were going to be able to attract tier 1 solar operators. So by having a technical scope that was simpler, we felt more comfortable that tier 2 or even tier 3 solar operators would be able to implement this project successfully. But again, that means that a significant amount of preliminary work has to be done, and that affects the timeline of the project. Another element that was important was having a PPA that was bankable. That means that was acceptable for lenders, that lenders could finance the project on a project finance basis. That would help lower the cost of capital of the project and hence decrease the tariff that the private sector required. But it would also help give comfort to bidders. As soon as you have provisions that are standard or aligned with what they've seen in other projects, that it really helps them look at this project, that really helps them show more interest, and that really facilitates their due diligence process. That does not mean that we gave the private sector everything that they could conceivably ask for. Just as an example, at the beginning of the project, we thought that we would need to have a sovereign guarantee to underwrite the payments from EDC, but that was not possible for political, legal, and even procedural reasons. So we worked with lenders to make sure that they felt comfortable with the off-taker credit risk. We gave them detailed financial information about the off-taker, about their balance sheet, their profitability, how different legislative initiatives could affect their position, what was their position when it comes to foreign currency. And by gaining support from lenders, that really helped us not need any sovereign guarantee or any external credit enhancement mechanism. But again, improving the PPA that is existing in a country, that means that you need more time to prepare it. Here we show a few examples of what we consider to be a bankable PPA, things like the technical requirements, the payment regime, termination payment regime, change in law and dispute resolution mechanism. I'll not go through this in detail in the presentation today. And finally, something that was also important was the fact that the government of Cambodia chose to work with international advisors. In this case, it was ADB, it could have been another institution, but that was important to signal to the market that this was a project that was going to be procured transparently. EDC is a very reputable institution, but international investors may not know this. So having an advisor like ADB really gave comfort to these international investors. And at the same time, it also signaled commitment to see the project through until the end. There have been a lot of RFPs in the solar industry that have been launched and then projects have not been followed up. By showing that they had worked with advisors, that they had invested a significant amount of time to develop the project, it really helped to signal that this is a project that was going to be completed. And in terms of results, this strategy that I just outlined, it helped us attract more than 150 companies to the bidding process. They bought the bidding documents. We received 26 bids, and these bids were very, very competitive, up to the point that for this project, we achieved the lowest tariff for a solar PV project in ASEAN at the time of bidding, which allowed EDC to save over $80 million. And if you compare the tariff with, for example, the tariff that we received for phase one was 3.877 cents, US dollar cents per kilowatt hour, that's almost half of what EDC was willing to offer and what EDC was actually signing for other projects that were procured through bilateral deals. It has also helped us showcase that Cambodia is an attractive investment destination, even after COVID. We have just completed the evaluation of bids for phase two, and I cannot disclose the price because it's not yet publicly available, but prices for the second phase are 30 to 40% lower than in phase one, which shows that for countries that are thinking how to bounce back from the COVID crisis, that are considering different mechanisms to restart their economic engine, implementing solar projects can be a good initiative, it can be a good option. This engagement that ADB had with the government of Cambodia helped them do more than just procure 100 megawatts of solar energy. It helped them design a strategy to procure solar energy. So as I was mentioning, competitive bidding takes time. So what the government of Cambodia has done is they do competitive bidding periodically every 2-3 years, and they use the prices that they get from this process to base the prices that they would use for projects that are implemented through bilateral negotiations that can be procured much faster. And they've actually implemented a large number of solar projects in Cambodia beyond the 100 megawatts that they've worked with us through this mechanism, through bilateral negotiations that are based on the price that they achieve with us. And even beyond Cambodia, that's a project that has really had a regional effect. We've seen a number of countries in the region moving from feed-in tariff or bilateral deals to competitive bidding, partially as a result of our project. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'll now give the floor to João to conclude.
Thank you, Ferran. Okay, so the solar roadmap and the National Solar Park had a catalytic effect with more than 400 megawatts of grid-connected solar PV capacity announced for commissioning by the end of 2022. And this is substantial given the size of the grid. And as you can see in this slide, the areas identified in the solar master plan match the locations of these projects. It's not very clear, but you can have a sense of it. So solar is expected to play an increasingly important role in Cambodia's power generation mix, because it's abundant and cheap. And different solar generation expansion pathways are being considered in the Power Development Plan for 2020-2040, which is being supported by ADB, as I have mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. And as Cambodia increases its share of variable renewable energies, such as solar power, it will need to manage the intermittency of these resources. And in this regard, it's important to note the steep decline in the prices of battery storage systems in recent years, as you can see in the graph, to the point that in some jurisdictions, renewable energy and storage systems are already cost competitive with other flexible power plants. And the first utility-scale battery energy storage system in Cambodia will be installed at the substation of the National Solar Park. And we also have in our project pipeline the development of a program to start in 2024 to expand the grid-connected solar PV with storage systems in several locations in Cambodia, which would build on the experiences of this pilot. This is all from our side. We document a lot of what we do in the form of case studies, videos, and we have a lot of materials on this project. All of them are available online for free, and I encourage you to explore them. Thank you very much. Over to you, Prianta.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the team for the excellent presentation and elaborating this very important project, renewable energy project. In fact, frankly speaking, we use this as an example to persuade others around to see how they can be, we can sell this idea of using the public-private partnerships and interventions from OPPP to expand this into other countries in our Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Now, let me start off with a few questions so that, I can pick up a few questions which you have already got in the chat box. To start off with, as I just explained, sometimes it's not just easy to get the governments on board for this kind of a thing. And what really, made the government to go for this public-private partnership in this solar park concept, rather than going through, for instance, sovereign financing, seeking sovereign financing for it, or just leaving it to the private sector to some or the other come and put it up and them to buy. So this PPP arrangement and working with our, in a way, sovereign and non-sovereign divisions with OPPP, what really changed the government's mind to come to this position? What did you do to the team, please? Yes. Can I pose that question to everybody in the team? Anybody who is willing to pick it up, please?
Yes, maybe I can start and then other people can share their thoughts.
Yeah.
When it comes to the way we convince the government to use private capital for the generation side of the project was we convinced them that funds from ADB were limited, so they had to be deployed in those areas where they would have more impact. And when it comes to solar generation, we convinced them that what I was mentioning before, there is plenty of private sector capital willing to invest in those types of projects. Actually, the equity IRR that the winning bidder had in their financial model was only 8%. That's a really, when you compare it with other sectors, that's a really low cost of capital. So that was the main argument. Basically explain them, look, yes, ADB funds are available, but they are limited. You need to use private sector funds for other initiatives. In solar, the cost of capital is quite low, and the private sector can bring significant efficiency gains, and it can also bring reliability into the system. If you have an operator that knows how to manage this, that has experience, that has done it in other countries, they can really ensure that this solar farm, this solar park is going to be operating in accordance with your specifications.
Good. Thank you, Ferran. Any other thoughts from the team?
Well, I may just
please.
Yes, I may just add very quickly that another important factor were the declining costs of solar and the opportunity for Cambodia leveraging this abundant resource that had barely been exploited. And testament to that was the very low price that at the end of phase one was achieved.
That's great. Thank you, João. Of course, for the last almost 1.5 to 2 years now, coming to 2 years, we have had this COVID pandemic, right? What is the impact of this pandemic on this implementation on this project eventually, the private sector's interest in coming and investing in this solar park, and the government's ability to invest in whatever the common infrastructure which needs sovereign financing? Probably. So what is the kind of impact overall of the pandemic on the project implementation?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. When it comes to the generation side of the project, this is almost like an experiment that we did in a laboratory, because we finished phase one of the project right before the pandemic started, and we received bids for phase two in February, so right in the middle of the pandemic. So it's really a good case example. The differences that we have seen are there were less bidders that expressed interest in phase two. That means that a number of companies have withdrawn and they are out of the market. We have also seen that some of the largest companies have probably retreated to their core markets, and Cambodia was not one of them because it was a small market when it comes to solar. But the companies that remain in the market were still very competitive and very aggressive. As I mentioned before, the final price that has been offered, and not by one bidder, but consistently by most bidders, was still significantly lower than the one that we got for phase one. And that's in an environment that doesn't really help solar industry because there are issues with the logistic change for some of the key materials for solar, and EPC prices have increased a little bit. So in spite of the fact that there are some temporary things that play against this having a good price for phase two, we have really been able to see prices that are very competitive.
Thank you. Before I go to the questions from the chat box, which is quite technical, before that, let me ask one more question. Actually, this is very important. Now, in most of these cases, the most important thing is to deal with usually the state-owned power utility and dealing with it, and their infrastructure is required when it comes to power evacuation, and who is going to invest on the transmission infrastructure, and if there is no adequate infrastructure, how they are going to pay for it, or if there is adequate infrastructure, how you deal with them to persuade them to absorb this power. And then, of course, as the off-taker, they would be talking about, oh no, this feed-in tariff is too high, too low. Of course, in this particular case, I don't think there is any argument of that being too high. But still, you know the traditional state-owned electricity utilities thinking and mindset. So how did you deal with that part of it? Who helped you to do that? What was the role of the souring, division, for instance, SCEN in this particular case? In that regard?
Yes. So, Joao, maybe I can give a first step and then you complement. But basically, SCEN was really critical in this process. So basically, the national utility had some interest in solar because they had been approached by a number of private companies presenting them proposals. But they were a bit reluctant to go ahead with solar energy because of variability, fluctuations of power, reliability of their grid, and so on and so forth. So what SCEN did is they prepared a grid integration study that really looked at the entire grid. It identified different areas where solar could be integrated, and it identified how much solar capacity could be installed and could be included in the power generation mix without needing any major investments in the grid. So that was really something that gave them comfort. And that's really something that said, okay, look, from a technical point of view, we know that in this area it can be installed safely, it will have a limited impact in our grid. And even at a later stage, SCEN did two additional things that were very useful. One is they finance storage capacity, a battery that helps smooth the output of the solar national solar park. And they also help identify bottlenecks. So, okay, they said that the capacity for installing solar generation capacity was X. But if they did a few limited investments in certain areas, could that increase given that solar capacity, given that solar generation was very competitive from a price point of view? And that's something that we think will really help EDC in the next 1 year or 2 years implement more solar projects.
Good, great. Any other inputs from the team?
Well, I can just further add to what Farhan said, that indeed this solar roadmap and integration study was instrumental in building the confidence of the national power utility EDC. The uncertainty of variable renewable energy resource was a concern that they had. And this study clearly showed that in the short run, there were no major concerns regarding the integration of this resource into the grid, into injecting into the grid. But as the share of solar increases, this will need to be taken into account in the future. But for the 400 to 500 megawatt of capacity, solar PV capacity that are planned for the next 2 years, there are no major challenges in terms of incorporating this share of solar. So I think that this was really instrumental, one of the key aspects, instrumental to building the confidence of the national power utility.
In other words, those who can address certain risks in the system, they were being addressed. That's what you were saying. The national utility and the government basically looked into those areas where certain risks might have come and increase probably the prices, competitive prices. And but those have been, once those have been addressed, then obviously the process was smoother, and we ended up with better prices. That's what you are saying, right? So that's important actually in this kind of PPP transactions, that these risks are allocated where the risk can be taken, so that you get the best of all the worlds when it comes to the project. That's excellent. That's excellent. So there is this important question, of course, from those who really would love to see environmental sustainability. And what it says is that looking at the graph, the coal-based power generation can be eliminated, if that can be eliminated from the system completely, because the graph show that even without coal-based power, the demand for Cambodia of the Cambodia system can still be met. So what do you think of it? I mean, anybody who is top-notch.
I think I can respond to that question.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oran, if you can come back to the slide, I think that we need to look more carefully into it. So on the left-hand side, you have the installed capacity, and what you see in the red line is peak demand. So, I mean, the solar capacity in 2019 and 2020 was still very small. So it was not enough to, of course, to meet the demands, the power demands. Now, we can always look into a scenario where, what if coal was removed? Well, theoretically, this is possible because one of the findings of this roadmap that I have mentioned is that the technical potential for solar is of around 44 gigawatts. The currently installed capacity in Cambodia is of 3.5 gigawatts. So it's a factor of more than 10. So potentially, in theory, this would be possible. But the reality is that this capacity has not been deployed yet. And realistically speaking, also what we see is that the government of Cambodia has committed in the last 2 years to increase the share of coal. So we'll see an increase in the share of coal in the power generation mix, the domestic one. So the share of solar, and this is something that we are looking as part of the power development master plan that we are preparing for Cambodia. So depending on the trajectories that we will see in the future, solar PV can play different roles. We are looking into a scenario where it will be very high on VREs, on the variable renewable energies, and others where other technologies will be considered. But the bottom line is that yes, to respond to your question, theoretically solar PV could meet the old generation, but the reality is that in the short run that won't happen.
Yes, thank you very much, Joao, for that explanation. Just to add to it, actually, one should realize that in a power system, you need megawatts, you need megawatt hours, or kilowatts and kilowatt hours. And then time matters when you get megawatts, when you're going to get those megawatts, and the ability to deal with other issues like sudden changes in demand and generation, how that can be picked up. So ramping rates of the generation, and how fast generation can pick up change in demand. So all sorts of other technical things will come in. With all that, you have a power system. That's why you have a generation mix in a power system, not just one monolithic, one single generation, type technology. You need to have that mixed purely for technical reasons sometimes. It's not just, for the sake of the primary energy input. Obviously, as Joe quite rightly said, we have probably adequate capacity of solar in the system once it's installed to supply the megawatt hours required. But then you have to look at the ability to store and shift energy requirements from one part of the daily load curve to another part. So all these things can be sorted out. Eventually, what is important is, even if you want to go 100% renewable, it's possible. It might cost a little bit differently, but it's possible. And I think that's there is another question which is not directly for the electricity sector as such, but it says that is any data available for when PPP was used in developing countries for road infrastructure projects. And the person asking the question is interested in projects that may be practical or those that were done in countries similar to my own country, Samoa. And do you have any examples? Any of you can give examples of PPP projects in developing countries for road infrastructure? Anyone of you? Of course, there must be a lot of examples in ADB, but do you know any of them?
No, I don't have anything to add on that.
Thank you. Probably I will pose that question to some of our transport guys and see whether we can get some inputs, and accordingly I'll pass the information down to the questioner. So that more or less concludes the first part of the session, and thank you very much to all the panelists and responding to the questions which came from me, of course, and also from the audience. That's excellent, and thank you very much. And this is an excellent example which can be replicated in other parts of our region, of course, even beyond the region, but of course our mandate is within the region, Asia Pacific. And so let's take this as a good example and get OPPP to start off with some of the initial work in some of these countries which are really interested in going into renewable energy. Thank you very much to the team. Thank you. Now let's move to the next project, the example, Balakot Hydropower Development Project. And I have already introduced the presenters, ladies and gentlemen, so I don't have to repeat it. And this is a very important project in terms of how project readiness has helped to improve implementation of the project, and how it has worked with other sectors like climate change adaptation, and also in terms of developing capacity and developing income generating opportunities for the local communities and so on. So it has that experience which can be shared by the team with the audience. Before me move into that, we will start off with a video, and that video I would we are playing this video courtesy of Cheap Energy. We wish to sincerely thank Cheap Energy for allowing us to use this video. And of course, I have to express the normal disclaimer from ADB. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the views of ADB or the policies of the Asian Development Bank or its board of governors or the governments these governors represent. With that disclaimer, let me now request the video to be played. Thank you.
Dam's significance is imperative for the prosperity of Pakistan and fulfill the water requirements for agricultural and power. Tarbela and Mangla multi-purpose mega projects sustain Pakistan's agriculture economy by supplementing and regulating irrigation supplies and providing cheap energy to the country. Since Pakistan has started the construction of Momin Dam and announced to commence the Diamar Basha Dam. On completion, the thousands of megawatts and millions of acre-feet water storage will be available. However, the cascading hydropower projects also playing vital role to mitigate the shortfall of electricity in the country, and Balakot HPP is one of the cascading hydropower project ready for construction. The 300 megawatt Balakot hydropower project is one of the series of hydropower project on Kunhar River launched by Pakhtunkhwa Energy Development Organization, Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The objective of the proposed hydropower scheme is to generate and add cheap energy to the system in order to meet the current shortfall and increasing demand of electricity in the region through economical and sustainable means. Balakot hydropower project is located on the Kunhar River, about 18.6 kilometers upstream of the town of Balakot in KPK province. The project is expand and 12 kilometers from Paras to Sangar village. The dam site will be located near the village of Paras, whereas powerhouse site will be located 8 kilometers upstream of Balakot, near Kapi Gali village. The run-of-river scheme was originally identified under the Study Identification of Hydropower Potential in Kagan Valley by the Sarhed Hydel Development Organization, now called PEDO, with the technical collaboration of the German Agency for Technical Cooperation, GTZ. A feasibility study of the project was prepared in 2013 and updated recently by reputed consultants. Joint venture comprises of Aqualogus from Portugal, Team Consultants and Zurich International from Pakistan. The consultants was released a draft report of their findings in 2018. Hagler Bailey Pakistan, Private, Limited, contributed to the environmental and social assessment of options for ensuring that the project meets the environmental and social safeguards. The 58 meters high dam structure is concrete gravity with a curved axis in plane and a radius of 187 meters. The dam crest elevation is 1292 meters above sea level and the crest length is approximately 130 meters. A crest width of 8.5 meters is proposed to ensure adequate access for vehicles, cranes and other maintenance equipments. It has been designed to pass floods of 3,500 cubic meter per second with an upper gated OG crest spillway and a low-level gated spillway. This layout consists of 3 radial upper spillway gates, having an opening of 11 meter height and 10 meters width, as in 2 low-level spillway sluice gates of 8 meter height and 6 meter width. The gates are hydraulically operated for flood discharge and are set at the crest level of 1,252.5 meters above sea level. The river diversion scheme consists of a right bank diversion tunnel which will be further converted to a sediment bypass tunnel as well as additional openings in the dam body for the low-level spillway. The dam will create 2.2 kilometer long reservoir with a gross storage of 3.6 million cubic meter at the maximum operation level, 1288 meters above sea level. The proposed reservoir falls mainly in the residential area of Paras town, starting from just downstream of Tailrace area of under construction Suki Kanari hydropower project. During filling, hundreds of residential and commercial properties will submerge in the reservoir on the terrace deposits of Kunhar River. The headrace tunnel extending 9 km will divert water from the reservoir created by the dam to the powerhouse. It is designed on the left bank of the Kunhar River, having internal diameter of 8 meter, which will passes through highly tectonic zones in the Murray Formation. At the end of the headrace tunnel, surge shaft is designed to mitigate the water hammering effect in case of sudden shutdown by closing the turbine valves. If no arrangement has been made to prevent this water hammering, it may result in bursting of penstock pipe and may lead to serious stability issues. The construction of surge shaft is recommended by the raise boring method and expansion of shaft after raise boring is designed with drill and blast method. Initially the pilot hole shall be drilled and then re-aiming process shall follow from bottom chamber and in the end, expansion of shaft and concrete lining be made. The surge shaft is 122 meter high having internal diameter of 14.5 meter. Steel lined pressure shaft having length of 152 meter shall feed powerhouse. The BHPP powerhouse is proposed on the left bank of Kunhar River near Kapi Gali village under the rock cover of 230 meter. The underground powerhouse is composed of 2 conventional cavern structures for 3 identical Francis units with vertical axis and for the power transformer and GIS equipment. The main hall of underground powerhouse shall be 71 meters long, 20 meter wide and 34 meter high. The transformers cavern shall be 88 meters long, 14 meter wide and 15 meter high. The access tunnel is arranged for main powerhouse and transformer hall. During construction it would be used for excavation activities and during operation for access of O&M personnel. The Balakot hydropower project caverns would be constructed multi-story structure like other underground complex. The excavation is recommended with conventional drill and blast method. The excavations of underground caverns shall be done layer-wise with controlled blasting. 1.6 km long tailrace tunnel having internal diameter of 8 meter is designed to drop the water into Kunhar River after feeding the turbines. The living facilities necessary during construction and for operation maintenance, temporary and permanent staff residential colony, would be constructed with all allied structures such as office building, rest house and staff houses. The exterior switch yard is arranged on the banks of the river near the powerhouse access tunnel, from where power will be evacuated to the national grid. Out of 3 generating units, 2 will be connected to 500 kV grid and 1 unit will be connected to 132 kV grid to supply local grid of the Balakot area. The project will provide 1,250 GWh average annual energy in the system. It is expected that construction will commence very soon as the Paktunkwa Energy Development Organization, with the collaboration of Asian Development Bank for financing the $645 million, has already initiated the bids process for the selection of consultants and the main contractor to implement design, supply and installation, testing and commissioning of Balakot hydropower project. The construction period of the project is 75 months. Thanks viewers for watching and thumbs up if you like. Write us in the comments section and subscribe our channel for more updates.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me now invite the project team to start the presentation, please.
Yeah, this is Aziz Raza. I'm a project director of Balakot Hydropower project. And I'm very thankful to ADB as well that they have selected this as a case, case study for this project. So basically, this is the funding agency who is, investing in this project is the Asian Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and executing agency is the Pakhtunkhwa Energy Development Government Organization of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and consultants are the project management consultant. This is a basically JV with the Dolser and the local companies of Pakistan, Aegis, BAC, SafeTech Associate, and Techno Legal Consultants Private Limited. EPC contractor is the China Gizuba group of company, and they have local JV with the Ghulam Rasool and company. So this is basically dam and reservoir layout plan. For your information, and you are seeing that we have, this pink color is basically the boundary area of the, Kunhar River, where this reservoir has to be, developed. This project technical features, I think already, have been found in the video as well. So this is the same, and the completion period of this project is the 2027. So why the project was needed? Basically, the current energy mix in Pakistan, it required 39,000, installed generation capacity at the moment, and you have seen that the maximum percentage of thermal energy is covering, the whole installed generation capacity. So government is having, plan to improve its energy mix plan with the, increasing this clean energy share, especially hydro, wind, and solar. So as you see that hydro is only having 25% of, the total capacity of installed, generation. Then thermal is 66%, nuclear is 3.62%, solar is 1.02%, wind is 3.16%, and bagasse is 0.93%. So why basically the basic reason for the project developed as part of the government's plan to improve its energy mix, as I told you that the increasing clean energy share in the country to improve access of electricity in terms of population number as well as availability in the KPK province, especially surrounding mountains district which have very low access. To increase revenue generation potential of the provincial government by exploiting indigenous resources, which provides additional cushion in provincial budget for social sector spending and uplifting of the remote areas of the KPK. Then due to size and complexity of the project, one of the key considerations given in the government and financing institution was the readiness of the project, and advanced procurement actions were taken to make sure project is ready for the award as soon as loan is approved. Both EPC contract and project management consultant selection process was completed as advanced procurement action under ADB procurement policy. All assessments regarding land acquisition and approvals of Environment Agency were also secured prior to approval of loan. Project management concerns were not only produced but mobilized even before approval of ADB loan to help government in initiating early stage work and to help in negotiation with the EPC contractor and affected communities. Essential staff in project management unit was appointed, and some of the key staff positions were temporarily filled to achieve project readiness. All government internal approvals were taken upfront before loan approval. Consultations with affected communities was initiated in advance, and draft land acquisition documents were prepared and disclosed to ensure addressing the concerns from key stakeholders and avoid any major issues at later stage. It is all because of the strategy adopted by government and ADB to address the issue upfront and take early actions which helped in having achieved such level of project readiness at loan approval. Then these are the three basically implementation stages. Procurement and pre-construction was the 12 months which has been completed. in September, and now the second stage is the design review and construction supervision, 75 months, which is ongoing. It has been started from 27th September. Commissioning and monitoring DLP is having about 12 months, which is planned in 2028. So there is a climate change considerations. We were having the key challenges over here, also high complex climate environment with uncertain climate outcomes and complex and vulnerable critical infrastructure, risk to financial viability variable and our water availability, risk to operations, increased sedimentation, potentially catastrophic impacts, flood and overtopping, and how we approach and to go to these solutions. Early stage, we get support from international consultants and ADB experts, climate and hydrological assessment with medium and high case scenarios, specific strengthened dam cannot withstand flood risk, financial viability assessment includes downside risk, enhanced capacity building and awareness program. Then there are the key features to support community mobilization and climate change through project implementation for this project. So we have planned an NGO will be hired by government to mobilize local community, address their concerns and develop their skills to benefit from the economic activities around the project area. NGO will also develop and implement awareness raising programs for local communities on climate change and disasters triggered by natural hazards. Mothers and youth groups in surrounding schools and communities as climate change leaders will be trained to create awareness on issues related to climate change. Then climate change adaptation and mitigation plans will be implemented by the government and capacity for climate change risk management in hydropower protection will be enhanced. All these actions have been built into the project implementation design and financed through ADB loan and will be implemented with the support of international and national consultants based on best practices. While challenges for such mega projects are huge, government stands ready with the support from international financial institutions to meet these challenges efficiently and effectively through early engagement and better coordination with all stakeholders, as was demonstrated at project readiness stage. Thank you. Over to Mr. Priyank.
Thank you very much, Aziz, for that brief but important, elaboration of what has been done on this particular project and the key salient features of the project and how it has helped, to diversify and to probably improve energy security and so on. Let me start off with some of my questions that I have. One important thing is that how did we manage to achieve this, project readiness, particularly high procurement readiness and design readiness in this particular project? Let me request Adnan to, chip in your thoughts on that, how we manage this high procurement and design readiness.
Thank you, Priyanta. So basically, there are many things, but there are two main factors which I would count as the reason for high procurement and design readiness, which I would like to mention. First is the government's ownership. So at the country level, the project may not be the largest, but because this is a provincial project and province is the one which is borrowing and implementing this project, for them, this was the largest project ever done by the province. So the complexity, the nature, and being the largest project, it always was getting the highest level attention from the government side. And because it was getting the highest level attention, so the project team was also established right from the beginning. And that project team, with the support of our TA consultants and their own consultants, managed the project very well in the initial stages. So at every stage, they were working very hard to achieve the targets that were set. The second key factor which I would like to mention was that EDB and government from the beginning, we agreed that project readiness and project processing both will go with each other. So we put some targets that once you meet this target, then the processing will move to next step. For example, contracts to be advertised, and then we go for management review. The project management consultant mobilized, and then we go for loan negotiations. EPC contract ready for award, and then we go for board approval. EPC contract ready to mobilize, and then we signed the loan. And both these tracks were basically pushing each other. So whichever track was behind, the other one will push it. And that was very important factor in all this. And that's the reason the loan was signed and made effective just 3-4 months back. And now we have the management consultant, the EPC contractor, both mobilized, and we have about 20% of the loan also already dispersed. So which is a big achievement in the beginning of such mega projects. So I would give these 2-3 points as the key factor behind the readiness.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adnan. It's quite an interesting way to get the government ready, and while we work on the processing side. Yeah, it's quite interesting. It never occurred to me that we should be doing this. Yes, that's excellent example or lesson to learn from. And Aziz, would you like to chip in how on the government side you contributed to this readiness, setting up of the PMU staff and government budget allocations and land acquisition and so on? As you know, you have a lot to do on your side. And how did you respond to this requirement?
So as Mr. Adnan has already explained, so basically, government was also parallel working with the ADB. And we have, allotted all the budget regarding, especially, every project is having the one issue is with the land acquisition and the funding. So for this project, everything is online, and I don't see that there will be, delay on any, party. And I hope that we will complete in time this project.
Thank you very much. I know. So basically, you push each other to get it in time. Yeah, excellent way to work, and that's quite a good partnership in that sense. Nathan, on the capacity development side, I know this project has one key objective is to building capacity awareness on climate change impacts, adaptation, and mitigation measures. Can you describe for us how that was integrated into the design from the very beginning?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. Certainly, from a very early stage, Adnan brought me on with the intent to have climate change very much front and center for this project, to be a big component with the recognition that this is one of the key, not only countries vulnerable to climate change, but also key sectors and projects that would be at the forefront of climate impact. So certainly important to do the appropriate due diligence and incorporate the necessary aspects of management, design, siting, specifications, and capacity building. On the actual risks, if I may just take a step back, it's important to note that there's a couple of aspects going on here, in that the sense that we've got climate change risk coming from the very much acute damage, for example, landslide risk, flood risks, which would hit the dam, but also issues of operation and maintenance. So it's a broader perspective of climate change impacts that we may not see in other sectors. And so it's important for us to have incorporated that into the assessment. As mentioned, we brought on a number of key specialists from SDCD to support us on that, on the hydrology, for example. For the capacity building, it was important to understand that we couldn't just build it into the dam itself and leave it at that. It was an ongoing climate risk management that was necessary, not only at the dam itself and for the management of the generation, but also the cascade and the broader subsector and sector itself. So that's why we've sought to bring in capacity building for the community in terms of the impacts that they may face, and this was mentioned in the presentation, where we see a number of community champions among those who would be most critically impacted and who could pass that knowledge on from generation to generation. Number two, we also see the importance of the operating procedures requiring the necessary climate risk management with respect to appropriate use of resources, which we wouldn't imagine, and the modeling is telling us, are going to be increasingly variable over time and over season by season. And finally, we are looking to bring in a broader technical assistance to look at cascade management. And there's a number of operations plants on the cascade, and we would like to see, this is currently under development, to see on a broader scale where we can bring in and support more climate resilient hydropower in the province. So I'll stop there and hand back to Adnan if there's any further you would like to add on that.
Adnan, anything you would like to add? And you can always also include.
Thanks.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Thanks. No, Nitin already covered everything. So back to you, Priyanka.
Excellent. Let me ask, of course, building on what we all have been saying. How challenging was it to get the project readiness and financial close? It's a huge project. It's not small, right? It's $600 million and a 300 megawatt project. And so, how challenging was it when it comes to the financial closure and get all the stakeholders together and close it?
I'll take that. So it was very challenging, actually, especially this, as I mentioned, the matching schedules we had for financial close and for project readiness, because they were moving together. That became itself challenging because you're asking the government to award contracts and mobilize consultants, but at the same time, you need to have the loan also so that the payments can be made. So you had to match them very closely. And while all this was happening, we were in the middle of or in the start of COVID. So we were having procurements. The procurement started and this first phase of COVID came in. So we had to continuously extend the bidding process again and again. And then it became very challenging because the contractors had to come do site visits, pre-bid meetings, and COVID was very new at its peak. People didn't have an idea of how to manage these things. So it was all that process was very challenging also for us and especially for the government. With this, the project itself, as you said, it's quite big, not only big, but it was technically complex also. We had some issues with the feasibility as well, some technical issues because of which we had to update the whole feasibility. So again, international consultants had to be mobilized. So readiness, financing going together was what made us do this project, but was also what made the project more challenging. So that was the key challenge we had: COVID, technical issues, no mobility, no offices, government offices were closed, our offices were work from home. So all these together made it very challenging.
Yeah, thank you, Adnan. I know it's not that easy. I mean, to get all these things together and put in place and addressing. So, Nathan, if I may go back to you on the climate change side, and now you did all this modeling. You got the help from SDCC, SDCD team. Now you looked at the various climate change challenges and how it's going to impact on the project. Did that eventually end up with design changes and also did you put those numbers into the economic and financial analysis and came up with new numbers? I'm sure even Adnan will be able to chip in. Yeah, what exactly resulted in? Of course, you look at the ability for this project to withstand certain severe weather conditions, and also how it's going to impact on water flows and so on and so forth. So eventually, all these basically were fed into the model, economic and financial models, and the designs, and eventually something looked into based on this.
Thank you. Yes, a very good point. Sorry, I think my audio was a little bit garbled, but I hope I got the full gist of your question. So absolutely, we transitioned the broader physical analysis or modeling rather from the climate side down to the hydrology, down to the sort of stress testing of the dam itself, as well as an understanding of the economics and the financial aspects. So that was a full integrated package of analysis. On the actual water availability, which was the key question for us beyond the flood, that was incorporated into the financial analysis, and the scenario suggests that while there is a broader increase in overall water availability, and that would impact the financial viability in a broad sense, there is actually a decline in the availability of water in the peak months. So that is a negative impact, and therefore would have to be factored in, and was the part of the sensitivity analysis was to identify that the project would still be robust even under more extreme outcomes. On the actual physical impacts, and if I may also add, apologies before I jump to the next, we also incorporated the need for additional O&M factors for the increased sedimentation. So additional flushing would be required, and therefore, again, degrading the amount of generation that was necessary, feasible.
Thank you, Ned. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I'll stop there. But physical, if I could just finish on the physical side, the stress test on the physical was a combination of both the seismic aspect, but also on the flood aspect, and those were confirmed to be, because of the upgraded seismic strengthening, we were able to also confirm the flood resilience. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else, Adnan, would you like to add?
No, just to close on it, yes, these costs were added to the economic and financial analysis. So you can say that the climate change part was covered there also.
Yeah. Thanks. Aziz, on your part, now you sit in the government, and when you have the design changes, obviously it changes the costs eventually, right? And so was there an issue when it comes to government accepting, sometimes, we do certain things and certain level of modeling and so on, and probably on the other side, government may say, we should not, so 100 years time, who cares? Was it a problem?
So basically, at the moment, I think it has been resolved, as we have done the revision of feasibility study through ADB, and what they have proposed the design, and that has been already provided to the contractor as well. And I hope that there will be no design change in this. If let's see what the things will come up from the contractor, because now he is on the board. And he has started, study for this design stage as well. So we still not received, at the moment, but I hope that it will not be changed. Hopefully, there will be no design change at the moment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. No, that's great. That's great. It's important because this is, these are serious modeling, and all these will have to be taken into consideration, because these are not small infrastructure projects, and we have to make sure that all the risks are attended to. So there is a question from the audience. That is, could you please provide more information about land acquisition and resettlement of project affected people? A question from the audience. Anybody who would like to respond to that?
Sure. So we prepared a draft land acquisition and resettlement plan. Government prepared, and we approved, and it's available on our website. And now government is in the process of updating it just to cover the additional influx of people which basically came there in the last couple of years when the project was being designed. We have considered lessons learned from other similar projects while preparing those. And we are looking at also including a very innovative kind of livelihood restoration program also as part of it. Although the affected area is not big because it's not a storage dam, it's a run of the river with minor ponding in it. But still, whatever portion we have where people are affected, we are trying that it should follow standards as per any international organization, and by right now the contractor is doing the design. So by the time the design is finished, the resettlement is also scheduled to be completed by then. So at the moment, they are at the stage where they are already done the demarcation of the area required, and now they are doing the pricing of that land.
Thank you, Adnan. It's very important that the audience remembers that ADB is an international financing institution, so we have our strict safeguard policies and guidelines, and we follow it. That's one of the reasons why multilateral banks like us coming into these projects are important, and we look after all these different stakeholders the way it should be. And we always look at a very balanced. We have a very balanced view of these projects, and costs and benefits very well looked after. And this is one of safeguards is one of the most important areas we carefully handle and make sure that it happens the way it should. And so then there is another question regarding the readiness risk management. At what risk management process was undertaken in the project readiness process? Is there anything what you would like to add on that, Adnan, on the risk management process? Yeah.
Sure, exactly. I'm not sure what the question is targeted to, but I'll just give a general answer. There are multiple risks. For example, the risk of reviewing the feasibility and making sure everything is included in the design. So that risk was covered by us by putting multiple level of reviewers. So there is a review consultant within the government. Then there's the government's technical team. On top of that, we had an international firm under RTA which reviewed, and then finally it was all approved and agreed with the international panel of experts, dam experts. So that was the part where we were looking at the risk associated with the design and feasibility. Then if you're talking about dam break analysis, yes, that was also done. All the risk associated with it were also covered in the design and were reviewed by the panel. If you're talking about other technical, financial, resettlement, environmental risk, yes, every one of them has been considered. And if you go to our website, you will see there's an attachment on risks identified and how they are going to be mitigated. So there's a full document there, which will be more helpful if you're looking for details.
Thank you very much. And now I think probably we will open the floor for both panels for the questions to answer questions on either on Cambodia or on Pakistan projects. Cambodia team to get back to the stage. And one question asked is that how forex element risk covered for international private investors in the Cambodia project? That's a question coming from the audience. Anybody would like to take it up in the Cambodia team?
Yes, I can explain this one.
Yeah, Farhan, please.
Basically, the tariff is set in US dollars, and it is paid up to 88% of the annual revenues are paid in US dollars. And then EDC, the national utility, has the discretion of paying up to 12% in local currency. And the reason why they set this 12% is because in any case, whoever is the private company that implements this project, they will have some expenses locally in terms of O&M and other local expenses that will be in Cambodian real. So, and that corresponds roughly to 12% of the annual revenue. So that's how they calculated this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good, great. Thanks a lot. And obviously, that helps when it comes to the foreign exchange risk element. And there is another question that is, obviously when it comes to PPP, government invests in certain infrastructure. The question is how the local community is going to benefit, and what has happened, what the local community gets out of this whole thing, income from this project. Any responses to that?
Yes, here for Cambodia, the project is not yet implemented and construction has not yet started. So they have not yet seen any impacts. Nevertheless, if we look at the other solar project that was implemented in Cambodia, if you just look at the video that ADB produced, which is in your website, you can see how local people benefited from well-paying jobs, how that impact their lives. And there is the example of one of the employees that is doing maintenance in this 10 megawatt solar park, and she's explaining how this has changed her life. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that video.
And the other important thing is that usually when we do this kind of projects, if the project comes in a particular geographical area, in these countries, sometimes it's not fully electrified. Some of these project areas may not be electrified. And one of the things what we usually do is to encourage the government, the utility, to come up with the electrification program around the project, and just to help the local community. And eventually they get electrified, and electrification means income generating opportunities. So that's one thing what we always do in sovereign projects or in PPP projects. I'm pretty sure, eventually that happens even in Cambodia or any other place. So that's one way to do it. And there is another question about the regulatory environment. Now, obviously, the regulatory environment is quite critical when it comes to private sector or PPP project in particular. Not that it is not important for the sovereign projects, that's also important, but much more important when it comes to private sector participation. How was the regulatory environment or the framework in Cambodia helped or not helped, or not adequate or adequate to go ahead with this project? And if you had issues, how did you overcome it? Any thoughts on that?
From my point of view here, it worked a little bit the opposite way. And that's a very unique case, because we had a situation where the government of Cambodia was creating a new PPP law. And what they did is they used this example to learn lessons, to try to see what was really critical for the private sector, for projects to be successful. And they incorporated those lessons into their new PPP law. So the relationship here has worked a little bit the other way around. This project has helped setting up a regulatory framework. But in general, in my experience, that's a good way of setting up PPP frameworks. Whenever we've seen PPP frameworks that have been created without taking into account particular projects, there may be sometimes small details that are not working, or some things that have been overlooked, or how the PPP legal framework interacts with other pieces of the national legal framework that do not work well. So I think that this is a good model, actually, and that's something that when countries try to develop a PPP framework, they should think whether it's something that they can do in parallel with the implementation of one project.
Great, excellent. You are right. We basically bottom-up approach. Like, you have a project, the project needs a regulatory framework. So based on the project, to develop a framework required for it. So in a way, it helps much more rather than doing a top-down approach for the regulatory framework. And sometimes a regulatory framework may be a hindrance, an existing one, and to move forward. You are right. And also these ones can be regulation by contract. There is always a contract with the private developer. So whatever which can come in the contract, the agreement. You don't really need the regulatory framework in that sense, as long as you have everything covered within the agreement with the private sector. Thank you very much. So the panel can ask questions from each other. Please go ahead, and this is interaction among the panelists, not between myself and the panel. And now, for instance, if I may pose a question, and obviously, couldn't OPP come in the Balakot project to make it PPP rather than a sovereign project, just to catalyze the discussion?
Yeah, no, definitely that. Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Adnan first, and then Ferhan next. Yeah.
That was something we considered in the beginning, in the middle, at the end, at every level. This is a topic which comes up every time you take such kind of projects. We did. Initially, when we started this project, the idea was that the government had a list of 31 projects. So they wanted some of them to be developed by private sector and some by sovereign sector. So we agreed with them that we will pick a project which will be of least interest for private sector, because we wanted to demonstrate to everyone how to best do a hydropower project, considering resettlement, climate change, environment, biodiversity, everything. We wanted to be inclusive in a project, and then the others can take it as an example. So we started with that, but later on, then we thought that maybe we can have some private sector component in it. And we did rounds of discussions with everyone, but it was becoming very complicated, and the project was also very complex. So the interest that we got was not enough. That's why we proceeded with it as a sovereign project.
Thanks. Ferran, would you like to add anything on the other side?
No, I was just going to emphasize the same thing that Adnan just mentioned. I mean, for us, what is really important is whether that's something that is driven by the client. So if we've seen multiple projects that are very interesting, that are great ideas, but then the government is not fully sold on the idea of implementing it as a PPP, and these end up failing because they are not willing to do the necessary commitments, the necessary contributions to a project to work as a PPP. So that's a very important element for us.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, the ownership of the client is very, very important. And we have to understand that eventually the success depends on the situation on the ground. You're very right. I mean, ownership, and also when it comes to a complex project like this, it's not that easy when it comes to putting every piece together. And because 300 megawatt hydropower project with all these complexities associated with climate change and everything else, it's not that easy to deal with, and also to attract private sector. Thank you very much for that response. And any other experience and lessons which you would like to share among yourselves?
I was just talking about OPPP's role in Pakistan in the power sector. It's a sector that we've monitored closely, and we are working in one hydropower plant called Lower Spatga, where we are advising a Korean bidder that is trying to implement it. Nevertheless, the government of Pakistan has been quite successful at attracting private capital. So ADB made a decision to try to minimize our role in that sector, just because the government on its own has already shown that they are capable of attracting the private sector. And ADB's limited resources when it comes to PPPs have been focused in other sectors or in other markets.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for the excellent presentations and the contributions to the discussions and responding to all the questions very well. Now, wrapping up, I must say that these are two excellent energy sector projects. They happen to be energy sector and excellent projects which demonstrated very well, very well how a PPP structure can work in the renewable energy, in this particular case, in renewable energy field. And this is a very good example which can be used in other parts of Asia Pacific region, particularly to bring down, the cost of renewable energy. And one of the, sometimes allegations is that renewable energy is too costly, and we cannot replace, the traditional low-cost coal thermal power plants with solar power. And costs come down. And another allegation is that the costs come down worldwide. Yes, true, but not in Cambodia, not in Nepal, not in Sri Lanka. But you can very well see, it's very well demonstrated how you can bring down the costs, with proper structuring of these projects and bring in, and risk sharing between private and public partnerships and then sectors. And that's an excellent example in Cambodia. I'm sure this will be replicated many more places in ADB. On the project readiness side, this is a very good example in Balakot hydropower project, where readiness was the key to get project implementation, and project processing done in time, and project implementation kicking off very well. And it's quite interesting what Adnan was, telling us, that how they tied couple project processing to readiness on the government side. And it's quite interesting, and it's quite good to get both sides pushing each other to make sure that the readiness is at its peak when it comes to taking the project to the board, eventually helping the country. And particularly a project like this, the readiness is very important, because otherwise naturally, as a borrower, probably the government would spend money on commitment charges. And I have, processed, and I have sat on projects where sometimes you have project processed and approved and sitting for 1 year to get the first contract out, more than a year. And can you imagine, that kind of readiness is not going to be helpful to the borrower and to the clients we are dealing with. In that sense, this Pakistan project is a very good example how we can use certain ways of getting the project readiness improved. And also, this very well demonstrates, both projects very well demonstrates the need for the client to own what we are trying to do. We cannot, push these things down the throat of a client unless the client really owns it and take care of their part of it. We cannot be successful as a financing institution in any of these projects. So client ownership is very important. As Adnan quite well explained, the very fact that this particular project, Balakot project, is borrowed and implemented by the provincial government, naturally it's a big stake for them, and it's a big project for them. And then they are quite interested to make sure it works. So client ownership is extremely important. And most of the time what happens in some projects is that client ownership is not there. And as EDB, we go there and try to push these projects, which is not a good thing to do. Client ownership is very. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that certain level of awareness is necessary, because client may not know exactly what is good for them, and we may have to do a little bit of awareness and capacity building for them to understand the need for these things, and then once that's done, client ownership is important for us to proceed successfully. So that's the lesson we have in this regard. So both projects in that sense clearly demonstrates all these aspects, and we are very happy that we could provide this to case studies in this important PPFD forum. And with that, again, thanking all the panelists for an excellent discussion and contributions you have made. Let me hand it back to the studio. Thank you. Thank you very much.